False allegations happen way too often in family court. I've talked about them before being the silver bullet or nuclear bomb that's used because oftentimes women are taught and coached on how to use false allegations to their advantage or to take a small situation and turn it into something bigger to gain legal control, to gain the upper hand in family court, to get child protective services involved, to get investigations, because that keeps you busy fighting the BS. That keeps you busy dealing with all the stress of that and not preparing for court, not preparing for mediation or preparing to resolve issues, to move forward, all that kind of stuff, because you're busy dealing with false allegations, you're busy dealing with investigations, you're stressed, you're spending money and time fighting that back, so you have less time and leverage to fight what matters. The most important thing to do is when there is a false allegation is not to panic. He who panics is lost, right? When you panic, you lose perspective, you lose leverage, you lose control, you're stressed out, you're not thinking clearly. So first thing is not to panic. The second thing to understand is to work with Child Protective Services, okay? But also understand that you don't have to let them into your home. You don't have to let the police officer in your home or Child Protective Services in your home unless they have a warrant. So that's going to be something that is up to you. Personally, I would talk to Child Protective Services without a warrant, but it's going to depend on your individual situation. However, I would never talk to the police without my attorney being present. I also would never talk to Child Protective Services and any police officer without things being recorded and videotaped. You need to check your state to understand if you're a single party state, and what a single party state means is that you can record video and audible without the other party's permission. You can also record the phone calls. Oftentimes states allow you to do that. Not every state does. You need to know what your state laws are, but never talk to Child Protective Services or a police officer without documentation of a recording and videotape. And if your state does require that you notify them, you tell them that this is being recorded and videotaped so that they know that. Way too many stories of guys have I heard where Child Protective Services came in, they did an interview, everything went great, and then all of a sudden they go on to court and they say a bunch of stuff that didn't happen, or they don't hold the truth. So one, you want to make sure you document. Two, you want to get a report from Child Protective Services of the complaints or what the issues were or all the documentation that they have. If you have to subpoena that you may have to do that, but you want to make sure you have all their documentation. Don't just take their word for it. It is important to work with the CPS investigator who's ever doing it. Typically they're females, and to be respectful, to be calm, but to also give them all the information, give them the backstory. This is not the time to be like, I want to be a man about it. I don't want to talk too much. I don't want to be vulnerable. Like, this is a time you got to put it all out there. So if your ex-wife or soon to be ex-wife or whatever has done some crazy things, this is time to let them know. Whatever the situation is, this is why I think she's doing it, all the stuff that you can. And again, you're recording that and you're documenting that so you have that on record. It's also important to be working with your attorney in this situation as well, because they're going to be most likely familiar with the investigator, the processes, the local district court, how the judge sees those things, all those things. The other thing is if there's a temporary protective order put in place, and this oftentimes happens very early, is when Child Protective Services come in, they put a protective order in there, or they get an ex parte hearing, and then what an ex parte hearing does is it's like emergency temporary order, and that might give your ex-wife like a 3-day temporary emergency order or temporary custody. And this is very painful and difficult for men to deal with, because now you're losing access to your kids temporarily. You can't have contact with them until the investigator kind of figured out what's going on. So that's an important time not to panic and not to stress out. I know it's easier said than done because it's a very stressful situation, but it is a process. And if it's all a bunch of hogwash and a bunch of baloney made up stuff, they're going to figure that out, and that's going to look good on you in the future. But in the meantime, it's going to suck. Some states have done a really good job with working on like 3 strike laws, if there's three false allegations. Time taken, time lost is an important one, where if they took your time away from you for false allegations, you get that time plus back. So individual states have done a good job passing laws. It just kind of depends on what state you're in and your scenario. So it's hard to talk to each individually because it's going to depend on, again, where you reside. The other biggest tip is, again, I've talked about a little bit, but is that mental mindset. You've really got to double down on your routines. You got to find people to talk to. You got to stay, mentally sharp and physically sharp and doing the things that you need to do, because it's going to drain you. So you need to be prepared for the long haul. That's why I always say divorce is a marathon, not a sprint. You've got to protect your mental focus and your physical focus so that you're in this for the long haul. This is oftentimes where we see men break. Unfortunately, this is a lot of times where we see men, no longer live or unalive themselves. So I can get past the YouTube algorithm blocking there. So this is a rough time in a lot of men's life when they lose access to their children because of false allegations, things that are lies. The good thing to remember, it's not your attorney's first time. It's not the Child Protective Services investigator's first time. It's not the judge's first time. They've been through this and they've all heard false allegations before. So this is not new to them. It's just new to you. It's also important during this process that, you're following the rules or you're being smart about it. A lot of guys will panic and start driving by their ex's house. They'll, send a bunch of angry text messages. They'll send a bunch of angry voice messages. They'll start doing a bunch of crazy things, or they'll get into their anger and they'll start losing control. And that's where a lot of guys lose everything. So it's so important that you don't lose control. You don't drive by our house. You don't wave guns. You don't make threats. You don't send text messages and voice messages, all those things that they can document that show you being crazy and angry and all that stuff. And that's why I talk many times about documentation. You have all your documentation, because you never know when some type of allegation is going to come forward. She might claim that you were verbally abusive or physically abusive, or whatever, or you did this to the kids, and a lot of different things, right? So you need to be able to protect yourself with timeline and documentation. So if you lose access to your kid, this is a good time to start getting all your documentation together, all your records together, things that you can show Child Protective Services, your attorney, your judge, documentation, pictures if you have them, text messages if you have them. Anytime that, she's potentially been abusive, verbally or physically, to you, the kids, any of those things. Guys oftentimes get to this point and they're like, we don't want to sling mud, or, look at me, I'm, 6'6", 250 pounds, she couldn't hurt me, all that kind of stuff. This is not the time to think about that. They're going to be coming for your kids and through your livelihood. They'll twist facts to get what they want, to gain the upper hand. So you have to be willing to do what it takes to protect yourself and your children. And I don't mean by lying or making false accusations yourself, but I mean having some documentation to be able to go back to and say, these are also things that happened. These are things that she did. No, I didn't do that, but here's this, this, and this. And that way you can push back a little bit on this, because if you don't, then they're going to come in heavy. So if you can push back and fight back, you at least have something that you have ammunition-wise. And the biggest thing is to not take this on alone. Get the help you need. If that's mental help, or a pastor, a priest, a doctor, a psychologist, a best friend, whatever. Maybe not go out drinking and partying or just trying to drink the pain away, but if you can get some good stability mental health, it's going to be very important. So I can't say that enough. We as men are terrible about doing that. Don't take it all on alone, guys.